Thank you very much, Paul, for your kind comments and your good sense of humor. Obviously, I consider Paul one of my mentorees, and I was very lucky to have someone like Paul as a mentor. Your outstanding career in public service is an example for many young people who are planning their future careers, and there are a number of you sitting here in the room today, and there's no better example of public service than Paul Volcker. I would also like to thank the Foreign Policy Association for awarding me their Foreign Policy Association Medal in their centennial year. As a longtime member of the FPA and a board member, it is a special honor to receive this award. I would also like to congratulate my fellow honorees, Darius Adamczak, who just accepted his award. And I have to tell you, Darius, that one of the first stocks I bought as a young man, and I still hold it, is Honeywell, and I have my stockbroker here at Merrill Lynch to attest to that. And Inga Tulin. Also, I'd like to thank all my friends, and especially my daughter Liz, who have come here tonight. I confess when I was considering what my brief comment should be about tonight, there were a profusion of challenges and worries that all of us think are worthy of discussion, particularly at the Foreign Policy Association. The crisis in Italy, what would this mean for the stability of the euro and the EU project? The looming trade war with China and the EU, and the deadlock in NAFTA negotiations with Canada and Mexico. Are we seeing the abandonment of rules-based global trading systems that were largely U.S. created after World War II? The erosion and divisiveness that exists in the governments of much of the so-called developed world, particularly in a number of G7 countries. As I said, all of these are great topics for the Foreign Policy Association, but in my limited time, I would like to take up the issue of trust that is facing the leadership of the U.S. banking and financial community, a number of whose institutions at a very senior level are represented here tonight. Almost 10 years on from the start of the global financial crisis, banks and the financial sector are seeing the loosening of financial regulatory rules put in place in 2008 after the Great Recession. Financial sector bonuses are up. U.S. banks, though perhaps not all European banks, but certainly U.S. banks, are on the mend. The U.S. economy is experiencing one of the longest periods of growth in modern times. We're over 9 years so far. Full employment has been achieved in America, with a real possibility that unemployment might get as low as 3% in the next year. But this is only part of the story. Trust in the financial and banking sector has still not been fully restored to what it had been. And without trust, voters' belief in the pillars of our system fails. Trust in government and in politicians continues to fall in this country and in many of the so-called countries of the developed world. In response, anti-establishment populism is rising across many countries worldwide. To be sure, we are here tonight not to fix the problems of government in the world, but specifically as backdrop, I wanted to mention this, and then I would like to get into what we can do, I think, which is to work to repair trust in the financial and banking system, which is a responsibility of many of us in the financial sector. I am focused on chairing a study of the G30, assisted by Oliver Wyman, on a report that discusses best practices towards repairing bank culture and conduct, ensuring we learn lessons from past failures, and in doing so, strengthen firms and the sector's reputation among the public. In other words, regain the public trust. We can work to ensure our own firm's cultures are strong, resilient, and sustainable, supporting the long-term growth of the firm and the social and economic purposes that underpin banks and banking. And we need to maintain this as a focus, because trust in finance and the banking sector still remains at a below acceptable level to what we would all want it to be, and particularly what our clients would want it to be. The 2017 Edelman Trust Barometer showed the following: an all-time low for CEO credibility with declines in all countries. In a positive finding, trust in U.S. finance has increased 6% over the previous year to 60%. But we look elsewhere and the picture is not as positive and is bleaker. Trust in finance in the UK sits at only 45% and in Germany at only 35%. A lot still remains to be done to repair trust in finance, even now, 10 years from the global financial crisis. Even though much has been accomplished and much is being done by the firms in this room. Great accomplishments have been made from those days, but we still have a ways to go. And unfortunately, we still pick up the newspaper and read scandals that are rocking finance in several countries. In the case of Wells Fargo, the cost of cultural failure has been materially damaging to the firm and its shareholders. Australian banks are also deep in reputational trouble. These banks, for a period, were the most profitable banks in the world. The performance always made one ask, what is really going on there? What are they doing that others couldn't do? History shows us that oftentimes there are hidden risks when we see something like this, and unfortunately this seems to be the case in these institutions or many institutions in Australia. The Royal Commission there has unearthed widespread culture and conduct failures across the board. I won't even go into them because they were mis-selling services to the public. And the public does not only not accept that, but they don't forget that easily. And what happens in one country affects all of us, and in one institution affects all institutions. I hardly need to note how expensive the cost of conduct failures is for firms and its shareholders. Bloomberg, and we have our beautiful, distinguished MC here with us tonight, but several other members and anchors of Bloomberg are also here tonight. They did an estimate in early 2017 and came up with a figure of $321 billion that had been paid out since 2008 for conduct and regulatory fines. Obviously, we're now talking about a year later, and this figure would be much larger. Many of the firms here tonight have felt the pain of these fines and regulatory action. And because of these failures, reputations that have taken decades and thousands of hard-working employees to construct have been damaged in some cases. Boards, and we heard about boards earlier, our previous awardee, boards need to continue their focus on conduct and culture. Bank boards must understand and monitor the firm's culture, ready to act when issues arise. Discussions of culture and conduct matter at the board and should not be the exception, but the rule. I think that when you take a look at what the safety records are in oil firms or in pharma firms, I think banks have to take a similar approach to failure or lack of implementation of culture and conduct that they have set forward as their goals. Senior executives must set the tone at the top. Lead by example. Executives must repeatedly address culture and conduct in their discussions in the firm. Some might respond, well, this is tiring. I've already said this X number of times. That's a wrong response. Repetition is key to success here. Successful firms embed their culture deeply within their businesses and their DNA. It becomes the way employees do business when their manager is not watching them over their shoulder. This is key. Focus on conduct and behaviors that constitute the building blocks of culture is not and cannot be an add-on or a grudging response to the forced regulatory demands of our regulators. It cannot work that way. It must be a permanent part of how a firm does business. It's a form, really, of crisis prevention going forward. Performance management and training is key. Stories and real examples of decisions taken in difficult gray areas to the staff are key. Through annual performance reviews, which should be split between financial metrics and conduct and behavior, and what we call this the what and how of how business is done at a firm. If employees break cultural norms in a serious manner, bonuses and promotions should be impacted. Serious breaches should lead to firing. Willful blindness or failure to speak up when breaches are taking place must have consequences. Speaking up must be rewarded and not punished. Too often we think of just punishing, but when there is good behavior, it should be rewarded. It sets an example for the whole firm. Singling out matters is key in all firms, and especially in large financial firms where managers on the senior level can't possibly know all that's going on with all of the staff and employees working for them. Strengthening the 3 lines of defense must continue. The first line needs to own culture and conduct, to embed the desired behaviors and conduct, to ensure conduct and culture is not a compliance tick box matter, but central to how a firm does business all the way from the top through the middle management right down to the teller in the banking system. We also, I think, in conclusion here, would say that there is a second line of defense which should ensure compliance. And the third line is the audit of what's going on in the first 2, including compliance and actual action. So let me conclude, because we still have a long night in front of us. Trust is central to our societies and our industry. At a time when regulatory rules are being weakened, firms need to redouble their focus on conduct and culture. The focus should be a permanent part of managing financial firms. It's not easy. It is sometimes, perhaps often, tiring, but we are on a journey and we have no other option. We cannot fix the problems of trust in society, but we can and must fix trust in our own firms. For surely if another series of severe interconnected financial crises erupt, the voting population, already angry and in many ways disillusioned, will not be generous to us, but they will be punitive. And I leave that as a serious last thought. Thank you all for listening to me. I think we've made great progress in this area, but we still have a ways to go, and we must maintain it going forward. Thank you very much.